I am Cher, 36 years old, and until last Friday, I was a senior software engineer with 12 years of experience. When my director, Katherine, called to fire me and cancel my project, saying my access was revoked, she had no idea I had prepared for this moment. You see, I discovered a critical IP loophole in our contract months ago. What happened next changed everything. If you are watching this, drop a comment telling me where you are viewing from, hit like and subscribe to hear how I turn the tables on corporate betrayal. TechVision was not just any software development company. It was my professional home for 5 years. The glass and steel building in downtown Seattle housed some of the brightest minds in software engineering, and I had worked my way up to leading one of our most promising projects. My team was developing a proprietary data security platform that could revolutionize how companies protect sensitive information. The project was my brainchild, something I had pitched to the executive board 2 years ago and had been nurturing ever since. 8 months before everything fell apart, TechVision hired Katherine Morgan as our new director. Katherine was 48, with an impressive resume that included stints at Google and Microsoft. She had sleek brown hair, always pulled back in a tight bun, wore designer suits, and spoke with the kind of confidence that made people listen. When she first arrived, I was genuinely excited. Her experience could help take our project to new heights, and in our initial meetings, she seemed genuinely impressed with the work we had accomplished. During the first few months, Katherine and I had what I thought was a great professional relationship. She would stop by my desk to ask questions about the platform, invite me to lunches to discuss future directions, and publicly praise our team's progress during company meetings. I trusted her leadership and felt valued for my contributions. Looking back, I should have noticed how her eyes lingered too long on my screen whenever she visited, or how she asked increasingly specific questions about proprietary algorithms. My team consisted of 3 other dedicated professionals. Jessica Williams was a talented young engineer fresh out of MIT, with a brilliant mind for solving complex coding problems. Though only 25, she had a natural instinct for security vulnerabilities that even veterans in the field admired. Michael Thompson was our user experience specialist, a thoughtful 32-year-old who could translate technical jargon into intuitive interfaces. Aiden Park rounded out our core group as the data analyst who could find patterns and insights that others missed. I have always been the cautious type. My father was a contract lawyer, and growing up, he instilled in me the importance of reading fine print and documenting everything. This habit followed me into my professional life. I kept detailed notes of all meetings, made regular backups of my work, and had carefully read every line of my employment contract when I joined TechVision. This attention to detail would prove to be my salvation. The first warning signs were subtle. About 4 months after Katherine joined, I noticed changes in her behavior toward me and the project. Our weekly one-on-one meetings became shorter, with Katherine constantly checking her watch or phone. She started rescheduling or canceling our discussions at the last minute. The questions she asked about the project shifted from genuine interest to what felt like interrogation. During a company-wide gathering to celebrate a successful quarter, I overheard Katherine in deep conversation with our chief financial officer. They stopped talking abruptly when I approached. The CFO avoided eye contact with me for the rest of the evening. That night, I had the first stirring of unease about my position and the future of my project. 2 days later, I received a calendar invite for a meeting titled Project Restructuring Discussion. The meeting was scheduled for a time when I was supposed to be giving a presentation to a client. Katherine had set up this client meeting herself just a week earlier. When I emailed her about the conflict, she replied that the presentation had been reassigned to Philip, a recent hire who had been with the company for less than 3 months. I was stunned. Philip barely understood our product, let alone had the expertise to present it properly. The restructuring meeting itself was vague and uncomfortable. Katherine spoke in corporate platitudes about shifting priorities and realigning resources for maximum impact. Nothing concrete was decided, but the atmosphere in the room was tense. Jessica caught my eye across the conference table, her expression mirroring my concern. Later that afternoon, Jessica stopped by my desk. "Something weird is going on," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I accidentally got copied on an email thread between Katherine and someone from outside the company. They were discussing our security protocols. The email got recalled a minute later. I tried to approach Katherine about it the next day, but her assistant informed me she was in back-to-back meetings and could not be disturbed. This pattern continued for a week. Every time I tried to speak with her, there was some reason she was unavailable. My longtime colleague and friend, James Turner, found me stress-eating in the break room one afternoon. We had started at Tech Vision around the same time and often acted as sounding boards for each other. "You look like you have not slept in days," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. I confided my concerns about Katherine and the strange shifts happening with my project. James leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There have been rumors. Katherine has been having closed-door meetings with the board about a complete restructuring of the tech department. Some people are saying she wants to bring in her own team from her previous company." That night, I stayed late at the office. After most employees had left, I began discreetly making copies of all project documentation, code repositories, and email threads related to the development of our security platform. I transferred everything to an encrypted drive and took it home. It was not theft. I was simply creating backups of work that, according to my contract, I partially owned the intellectual rights to. I did not know then how crucial this decision would become. The changes became more pronounced as weeks passed. I received a last-minute email excluding me from a critical project review meeting with the executive board. The message claimed it was to streamline the presentation and that Katherine would represent our team's interests. When I asked team members about the meeting afterward, they seemed uncomfortable and vague, clearly having been instructed not to share details. The pressure from management intensified. Suddenly, our project deadlines were moved up by 2 months. The board was supposedly anxious to see results, though we had previously agreed on a realistic timeline that allowed for proper testing and refinement. Katherine began sending daily emails demanding progress updates and questioning every decision I made about the development process. One evening, I was walking past the conference room when I noticed Katherine inside, alone, engaged in what appeared to be an intense video call. The blinds were partially closed, but I could see her gesturing enthusiastically at a presentation on her laptop. What caught my attention was not her animation, but the logo briefly visible on her screen. It belonged to DataShield, one of our main competitors in the data security space. My suspicion grew when a colleague from the legal department mentioned that Katherine had been asking unusual questions about our intellectual property agreements. She had specifically inquired about the ownership of code developed by employees and the company's rights to projects after an employee departed. Jessica became my unofficial informant, her position as a junior developer making her somewhat invisible to Katherine's scrutiny. She asked me to send her all the documentation for the encryption algorithm you developed, Jessica told me one day as we grabbed coffee. When I mentioned that I should check with you first, she said it was not necessary and that she had full authority over all project components. I tried once more to schedule time with Katherine, sending a calendar invite with the subject line, "Urgent Project Concerns." She declined the meeting with a brief note, dealing with higher priorities. "We'll catch up next week." But the following week brought the same excuse, and the week after that. During this time, I confided more fully in James about the situation. We met for dinner at a small restaurant, several blocks from the office, where we were unlikely to encounter coworkers. "Katherine held another closed-door meeting today," James said after we had ordered. "Alicia from HR was there, along with 2 of the board members. Were they discussing my project?" I asked, feeling my stomach tighten. "I think they were discussing you," James replied, his expression grave. "Alicia was taking notes and had your personnel file open on her tablet. I could see your photo from where I was standing." James went on to share more disturbing information. Katherine had been systematically repositioning herself as the visionary behind our security platform. In meetings where I was not present, she had been presenting my ideas as her own and minimizing my contributions to the project's architecture. Most alarmingly, James had overheard Katherine telling the CTO that she had concerns about the direction Cher was taking and felt that intervention might be necessary to salvage the project. That night, I expanded my secret archiving efforts. I began documenting every instance of unusual behavior, maintaining a detailed timeline of events, and saving all communication related to the project. I also dug deeper into my employment contract, paying special attention to intellectual property clauses and termination procedures. There was something there, a potential loophole regarding ownership of innovative solutions, developed primarily by an individual employee. But I needed more time to understand its full implications. The following Monday, Katherine announced that Philip would be taking over certain technical oversight aspects of our project. The justification was that Philip brought fresh perspectives that could help us meet our accelerated timeline. In reality, Philip knew far less about security protocols than anyone else on the team, and his inclusion created more work as we had to explain basic concepts to him. Jessica, Michael, and Aiden were clearly uncomfortable with the changes but were afraid to speak up. During our lunch break away from office ears, Aiden expressed what they were all thinking. "Something is wrong here, Cher," he said quietly. "Katherine has been pulling each of us aside individually, asking questions about your work habits and decisions. It feels like she is building a case against you." Michael nodded in agreement. "Yesterday, she asked me if I had ever felt that you were difficult to work with or resistant to feedback." The way she framed the questions made it clear what kind of answers she was fishing for. The team loyalty touched me deeply, but I was also concerned for their positions. "Be careful," I warned them. "Document everything, but do not put yourselves at risk. If Katherine is trying to push me out, I do not want any of you caught in the crossfire." As days passed, a clear division formed within the broader department. Some colleagues distanced themselves from me, sensing I might be on my way out and not wanting to be associated with someone who had apparently fallen from grace. Others, like James and my immediate team, remained supportive but were increasingly cautious about being seen talking to me. I started coming in earlier and staying later, partly to avoid Katherine but mostly to gather more information and secure my work. One morning, arriving at 6:30, I discovered that my keycard access had been downgraded. I could no longer enter certain areas of the building where project servers were housed. When I inquired with security about the change, they informed me it had been requested by upper management the previous day. That same afternoon, I received a meeting invitation from Katherine for 7:30 the next morning, with no agenda specified. The knot in my stomach told me what was coming. I spent that night preparing, gathering all my documentation, reviewing my contract once more, and making sure my backups were secure. If Katherine was planning what I suspected, she was about to discover that I was not as easy to eliminate as she thought. The tension reached a breaking point during a department-wide meeting where Katherine publicly undermined my authority. As I presented our progress on the security platform, Katherine interrupted repeatedly with pointed questions, clearly designed to make me appear incompetent. "Are you certain that approach will scale properly?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. Before I could fully respond, she continued, "Because our market research suggests otherwise. Perhaps we should explore the alternative method Philip mentioned last week." Philip straightened in his chair, looking surprised but pleased at the mention. The alternative he had suggested was one I had already evaluated and rejected months ago, for valid technical reasons that he was not aware of. "Actually, we tested that approach during the initial development phase," I replied calmly. "I would be happy to share the results data that led us to our current solution." Katherine waved her hand dismissively. "We do not have time for a retrospective deep dive. Let us stick to forward movement." She then redirected the conversation, effectively silencing me for the remainder of the meeting. Later that week, while running a routine check on our codebase, I discovered unauthorized modifications to several core components. Someone had been altering fundamental security protocols without going through the proper code review process. The changes were subtle but significant, restructuring how our authentication systems worked in ways that actually created potential vulnerabilities. I traced the commits back to Philip's credentials, but the coding style did not match his previous work. The sophisticated nature of the changes suggested someone with extensive security knowledge was behind them. When I quietly asked Jessica to review the code with me, her eyes widened. "This looks like it is deliberately creating a backdoor," she whispered. "If these changes went into production, a knowledgeable attacker could potentially bypass our entire security framework." I needed more information before making accusations. That night, I stayed at the office much later than usual, telling the security guard I was working on a critical deadline. Around 11:30, most of the lights were off, and the floor was empty except for me. I decided to walk past Catherine's office on my way to the break room. Her door was slightly ajar, which was unusual since she typically locked it when leaving. A single desk lamp cast shadows across her organized desk. I paused, listening for any sound that might indicate her presence, but the office was silent. I knew I was crossing a line, but my project and career were at stake. Slipping inside, I quickly scanned her desk. A sticky note with a password was attached to her monitor, a surprisingly careless security practice for someone in her position. Her laptop was closed but not locked away. I hesitated, weighing the ethical implications, when a notification popped up on her phone, which was charging on the desk. The preview showed an email from Alan D. with the subject line, Transfer timeline confirmed. I recognized the name immediately. Alan Davis was the CEO of DataShield, our most aggressive competitor. Why would Katherine be communicating with him about a transfer? Just then, I heard the elevator ding at the end of the hall. Quickly, I slipped out of Katherine's office and ducked into the nearby copy room. Through the crack of the door, I watched as the night janitor pushed his cart past. Once he had moved to another area, I hurried back to my desk, heart pounding. The next day, I used my system administrator privileges, which Katherine had not yet managed to revoke, to run a search of company emails. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Katherine had been in communication with DataShield for months. The emails were carefully worded, never explicitly mentioning our security platform, but reading between the lines made it clear that she was planning to deliver our technology to them. One email particularly stood out. "The asset transition can proceed once we have removed the primary obstacle. Timeline expected to be complete within 2 weeks. Compensation structure as discussed." I was the primary obstacle. Katherine was planning to sell our technology, my technology, to DataShield, and she needed me gone to do it. Digging deeper into public records, I discovered that Katherine and Alan Davis had attended the same business school and had briefly worked together at a startup 10 years ago. There were also social media photos showing them at industry events, standing closer than mere professional acquaintances would. This was not just corporate espionage, it was personal loyalty and likely financial gain driving Katherine's actions. As I continued my investigation, I noticed that Katherine had begun systematically transferring my responsibilities to Philip. Critical components that I had developed were being reassigned to him for review and optimization. Team members reported that Katherine had begun excluding my name from project documentation, retroactively crediting design decisions to herself or Philip. The divide in the team grew more pronounced. Jessica, Michael, and Aiden remained loyal, secretly keeping me informed of developments in meetings I was no longer invited to attend. Others, sensing which way the wind was blowing, aligned themselves with Katherine and Philip. "They are rushing the timeline," Michael told me during a covert conversation in the stairwell. "Katherine is pushing for deployment in 4 weeks, even though we all know the security testing cannot possibly be completed properly in that time frame. She told the board that accelerating to market is more important than perfect security," Aiden added, "that we can patch vulnerabilities post-launch. It goes against everything we have been working toward." Jessica looked particularly troubled. "Philip asked me to help him understand your authentication protocols today. When I explained how they worked, he took extensive notes and asked me not to mention the conversation to anyone because he wanted to surprise the team with improvements." The pieces were falling into place. Katherine was planning to rush our platform to deployment, possibly with the backdoor vulnerabilities intact. Once launched, these vulnerabilities could be exploited by DataShield, either to compromise our clients' data or to demonstrate that our solution was flawed. Either way, it would destroy TechVision's reputation in the security space and potentially allow DataShield to position themselves as the more secure alternative. I needed to act quickly, but I had to be strategic. Direct accusations without irrefutable proof would be easily dismissed, especially given Katherine's efforts to undermine my credibility. I needed leverage, something that would force the board to listen to me regardless of Katherine's influence. That night, I revisited my employment contract and the company's intellectual property agreements with renewed focus. As I carefully analyzed the language around proprietary developments, I finally found what I was looking for. There was indeed a loophole, one that Katherine had overlooked in her haste to push me out. According to the specific wording of my contract, while the company owned the overall product, the innovative algorithms and methods I had personally developed maintained a split intellectual property status if they could be demonstrated to have been substantially conceptualized prior to their implementation within company projects. I had extensive documentation showing the evolution of my security approach from personal research I had conducted before joining TechVision. Furthermore, the contract specified that in cases of disputed ownership, the company could not deploy or transfer technologies with shared IP rights without explicit consent from all parties with ownership claims. It was a small clause, easily overlooked, but potentially powerful leverage if used correctly. Armed with this knowledge, I began preparing my countermove. Katherine thought she was about to checkmate me, but she had severely underestimated her opponent. The call came on Friday morning, exactly as I had anticipated. My phone rang at 8:15, and Katherine's name appeared on the screen. Taking a deep breath, I answered, with a calm, "Good morning, Katherine." "Share," she began, her voice professionally detached. "I am calling to inform you that effective immediately, your employment with TechVision is being terminated." Despite expecting it, the words still hit like a physical blow. 5 years of dedication, countless late nights, and genuine innovation, all dismissed in a single sentence. May I ask the reason? I kept my voice steady, pressing the record button on my phone's call recorder app, a precaution I had set up days earlier. After careful evaluation of your recent performance and contribution to the team, we have determined that you are no longer a good fit for the direction TechVision is taking, Katherine recited, clearly reading from a prepared statement. Your approach to the security platform has consistently failed to align with company objectives, and your resistance to collaborative feedback has impeded project progress. The accusations were so blatantly false that under different circumstances, I might have laughed. Instead, I listened silently as she continued. The security platform project will be undergoing significant restructuring under new leadership. Your access to company systems has already been revoked, and human resources will contact you regarding final paycheck and benefits information. I see, I responded, injecting just enough disappointment into my voice. And my personal research and code components that were incorporated into the project? There was a slight pause. All work you performed as a TechVision employee belongs to the company, as per your employment agreement. We will be proceeding with the project using the existing codebase. I understand, I said. Is there anything else? Katherine seemed slightly thrown by my calm acceptance. Perhaps she had expected arguing or pleading. You will need to return your company laptop and badge to security. You can collect your personal belongings under escort on Monday. I suggest you use the weekend to begin your job search. She added with false sympathy, Good luck with your future endeavors, Cher. Thank you, Katherine, I replied. But before we end this call, I should mention that you seem to have forgotten one very important thing. What are you talking about? Her tone sharpened, caution entering her voice. Section 12, paragraph 4 of my employment contract, I said, allowing myself a small smile she could not see. We should discuss the implications before you proceed with any project changes. I would hate for there to be legal complications for the company. There was a longer pause. I do not know what you think you have found, but all intellectual property developed during your employment belongs to TechVision. The legal department has reviewed everything. I suggest you have them look again. I replied evenly. More specifically, at the dual ownership clauses for pre-conceptualized innovations. My lawyer will be in touch. Have a good weekend, Katherine. I ended the call before she could respond, giving myself a moment to breathe through the mixture of anger, vindication, and anxiety swirling through me. The first phase of my plan was complete. I had planted the seed of doubt, and now I needed to move quickly before Katherine could regroup. Within the hour, I contacted Richard Martinez, an intellectual property attorney recommended by a former colleague. His firm specialized in technology IP disputes, and he had successfully represented several engineers in cases against much larger corporations. I sent him digital copies of my employment contract, project documentation, and the evidence I had gathered regarding Katherine's communications with DataShield. This is quite interesting, Richard said during our initial consultation that afternoon. The language in your contract does indeed create what we call a zone of ambiguity regarding ownership of certain innovations. The key will be demonstrating that your core algorithms were substantially conceptualized before you implemented them at TechVision. I showed him my dated personal research journals, academic papers I had referenced, and early prototype code I had developed on my own time, all predating my work on the company project. This strengthens your position considerably, Richard nodded. But what concerns me more is the evidence suggesting your director may be planning to transfer technology to a competitor. That potentially moves this from a contractual dispute to corporate espionage. We spent hours analyzing every document, email, and piece of evidence I had gathered. Richard identified several clear contract violations committed by Katherine, including the unauthorized code modifications, the exclusion from meetings regarding my own project, and most significantly, the apparent plan to transfer technology without proper ownership resolution. Based on what you have shown me, we have multiple angles to pursue, Richard explained, laying out a strategy. First, we file for an emergency injunction to prevent any deployment or transfer of the security platform technology until ownership is legally resolved. Second, we prepare a formal complaint to the TechVision board outlining the evidence of Katherine's communication with DataShield. Will that be enough? I asked. Katherine seems to have significant influence with the board. Richard smiled grimly. That is why we also prepare a third action. We register a provisional patent application for your core security algorithm under your name based on your pre-employment development. This creates an official record of your claim and puts both TechVision and DataShield on notice that proceeding without your consent could result in patent infringement liability. Over the weekend, we worked relentlessly to prepare all necessary documentation. I provided Richard with access to my complete archive of project materials, and he brought in a technical expert from his firm to verify the uniqueness and value of my contributions to the security platform. By Sunday evening, we had assembled a comprehensive legal package. The injunction papers were ready to file first thing Monday morning. The complaint to the board was drafted with meticulous attention to detail, and the provisional patent application was prepared with all required technical specifications. Remember, Richard advised as we concluded our marathon preparation session, your goal is not necessarily litigation, which can be lengthy and expensive. Your goal is leverage. We want to create a situation where the TechVision board recognizes that working with you is more beneficial than allowing Katherine to proceed with whatever she has planned. That night, I sent emails to James, Jessica, Michael, and Aiden, briefly explaining that I had been terminated but was taking legal steps to address the situation. I was careful not to share specific details that might put them in a difficult position, but wanted them to know I was not simply walking away. All four responded with messages of support. Jessica's reply was particularly telling. Katherine called an emergency team meeting after your call. She was visibly shaken and had the legal team on video conference. Whatever you said really rattled her. Monday morning, I woke early, dressed in my most professional outfit, and met Richard at his office. We submitted the injunction filing electronically, and he confirmed that his associate would be delivering the formal complaint to each TechVision board member personally that morning. Now comes the most crucial part, Richard said. We need to request an emergency meeting with the board before Katherine can control the narrative. Are you ready to present our case? I took a deep breath, reviewing in my mind all the evidence, the contract details, and the timeline of events that had led to this moment. Absolutely, I replied. It is time to checkmate Katherine at her own game. By Monday afternoon, the wheels of my counteroffensive were turning rapidly. Richard had successfully filed the emergency injunction, effectively placing a legal hold on any deployment or transfer of the security platform technology. His associates had hand-delivered our formal complaint to each TechVision board member, ensuring that Katherine could not intercept or delay its receipt. The response was swift. At 3:15, I received a call from Eleanor Barnes, the chairperson of the TechVision board. Miss Walker, she began formally, we have received some concerning documentation regarding the security platform project and Director Morgan's management. The board would like to meet with you tomorrow morning to discuss these allegations in detail. I appreciate the prompt response, Miss Barnes, I replied. My attorney and I will be available. Your attorney will not be necessary at this stage, she said quickly. This is just a preliminary internal discussion. Richard, who was listening on speaker, shook his head vigorously. I understand your position, I responded, but given that I have already been terminated and have filed legal action to protect my intellectual property rights, my counsel needs to be present for any discussions regarding the project or the circumstances of my termination. There was a pause before Eleanor conceded. Very well. The meeting will be at 9 tomorrow morning. Please arrive through the executive entrance to avoid any unnecessary complications. The implication was clear. They wanted to keep this situation contained and away from the general employee population. That suited my purposes as well, for now. The next morning, Richard and I arrived at TechVision's executive entrance 30 minutes early. We were immediately escorted to a conference room on the top floor, a space usually reserved for meetings with major investors and clients. The wood-paneled room with its panoramic city view was designed to impress, but today it felt like a battleground. One by one, the 7 members of the TechVision board arrived, followed by their general counsel, Howard Phillips. Katherine was notably absent. Eleanor Barnes called the meeting to order promptly at 9. We are here to address serious allegations regarding the security platform project and certain management decisions. Miss Walker, since you have initiated this discussion, please present your concerns. I had prepared extensively for this moment. With Richard's guidance, I had organized my evidence into a clear chronological presentation that left no room for misinterpretation. Thank you for meeting with me, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I have discovered evidence of a deliberate attempt to misappropriate TechVision's intellectual property, specifically the security platform that my team has been developing for the past 2 years. Using the conference room's display system, I walked them through the timeline, starting with Katherine's arrival and the subtle shifts in project management that followed. I presented emails showing her gradual exclusion of me from critical meetings, the reassignment of key responsibilities, and the accelerated timeline that compromised security testing protocols. The board members listened intently, occasionally exchanging glances but maintaining professional poker faces. Howard Phillips took constant notes, his expression growing increasingly concerned. I then moved to the most damning evidence, the communications between Katherine and DataShield. These emails, recovered from the company's server using my administrator access, show a clear pattern of communication between Director Morgan and Alan Davis, CEO of DataShield, discussing what they refer to as an asset transition, contingent upon removing a primary obstacle. I displayed the emails on screen, highlighting the key phrases. Given the timing and context, it is reasonable to conclude that I am the obstacle, and that my termination was planned to facilitate the transfer of our security platform technology to DataShield. Several board members leaned forward, examining the evidence more closely. Eleanor's expression had hardened into something between shock and anger. Furthermore, I continued, I discovered unauthorized modifications to the project's core code that appear to intentionally create security vulnerabilities. I displayed side-by-side comparisons of the original code and the modified versions, with the potential vulnerabilities clearly highlighted. These changes were committed under Philip Walker's credentials, a recent hire with limited experience whom Director Morgan has been positioning to replace me. Howard Phillips cleared his throat. Miss Walker, these are extremely serious allegations. Do you have any evidence directly linking Director Morgan to these code changes? The code modifications themselves show expertise far beyond Phillips' demonstrated abilities, I explained. Additionally, I have statements from team members Jessica Williams and Michael Thompson noting that Katherine specifically instructed Philip to review and improve those exact components without team oversight. I then transitioned to the legal aspect of my case. Beyond the apparent corporate espionage, there is the matter of intellectual property rights. According to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of my employment contract, innovations substantially conceptualized prior to their implementation in company projects maintain a split ownership status. Richard distributed copies of the relevant contract sections, along with documentation showing the development history of my security algorithms predating my employment at TechVision. As you can see, Richard explained, Ms. Walker's core security approach was developed as part of her independent research before joining TechVision, while the specific implementation within your platform belongs to the company. The underlying methodology and algorithms have shared ownership. This morning, we filed a provisional patent application to protect Miss Silday Walker's interests. Eleanor Barnes frowned. If what you are saying is true, why did you not raise these ownership concerns earlier in the project's development? Because until recently, there was no conflict, I answered honestly. I was proud to contribute my innovations to TechVision and was leading the project in a direction that benefited both the company and my professional goals. The issue only arose when Director Morgan began excluding me from the project and apparently planning to transfer the technology without proper attribution or compensation. Just as I finished speaking, the conference room door opened, and Katherine walked in, looking confident until she registered my presence. Her stride faltered momentarily before she composed herself. I apologize for being late, she said smoothly. I was not informed that Miss Walker would be attending this meeting. Sit down, Katherine, Eleanor said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Miss Walker has brought some concerning information to our attention. We need your response. Katherine took a seat across from me, her expression carefully neutral. I assume this is about her termination. As I explained in my report, Cher's performance had become problematic, and her approach to the security platform was creating unnecessary delays and complications. Actually, Eleanor replied, this is about emails between you and Alan Davis at DataShield discussing an asset transition following the removal of an obstacle. Would you care to explain? The color drained from Katherine's face. Those communications have been taken out of context. We were discussing potential industry partnerships. Nothing more. And the unauthorized code modifications that appear to create security vulnerabilities? Howard Phillips asked. Can you explain why those were implemented under Philip Walker's credentials after Miss Sex's in? Walker was systematically excluded from project oversight? Katherine's composure began to crack. I am not a programmer. I cannot speak to specific code changes. If there are vulnerabilities, they were likely mistakes, not deliberate actions. I saw my opening. Katherine, we both know that is not true. The modifications are too precise, too targeted to be mistakes. They specifically compromise the exact security protocols that would prevent unauthorized data extraction, which is exactly what DataShield would need to access client information once the platform was deployed. Katherine's eyes flashed with anger. You have no proof that I was involved with any code changes. And regardless, all work you did at TechVision belongs to the company. Your termination was completely legal and justified. This was the moment I had been waiting for. That brings us to the final point, I said calmly. As my attorney has explained, my security algorithms maintain a split ownership status under the terms of my employment contract. I have extensive documentation proving they were substantially conceptualized before I joined TechVision. I leaned forward slightly. Furthermore, I have already registered a provisional patent application for these algorithms. If TechVision deploys the platform without resolving this ownership dispute, or if the technology is somehow transferred to DataShield, both companies would be liable for patent infringement. Katherine's facade finally shattered. This is ridiculous. You cannot claim ownership of work done while employed here. I will sue you personally for theft of company property and breach of confidentiality, Richard interjected smoothly. Miss Morgan, I strongly advise against making unfounded legal threats in front of witnesses. Miss Walker has acted entirely within her rights under both her employment contract and intellectual property law. Eleanor Barnes raised her hand, silencing further argument. I think we have heard enough for the moment. Katherine, please wait in my office. The board needs to discuss this matter privately. Her tone left no room for objection. After Katherine left, Eleanor turned to me. Miss Walker, you and your counsel may wait in the adjacent conference room. We will need some time to review all of this information and consult with our legal team. As Richard and I settled into the smaller conference room, he gave me an approving nod. You presented everything perfectly. Did you see their faces when you mentioned the patent application? That was the Checkmate move. An hour passed before we were called back in. The board members had rearranged themselves, now sitting united on one side of the table. Eleanor's expression was solemn but determined. Miss Walker, she began, after reviewing your evidence and consulting with our counsel, we find your concerns to be credible and deeply troubling. Effective immediately, Katherine Morgan has been suspended pending a full investigation into her communications with DataShield and her management of the security platform project. I maintained my professional demeanor despite the surge of vindication I felt. Thank you for taking this matter seriously. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, we would like to reinstate your employment at TechVision with immediate effect. The security platform project will be placed under your direct control, with expanded budget and resources to compensate for the delays these events have caused. Richard and I exchanged glances. This was a positive step, but not the full resolution we needed. I appreciate the offer, Miss Barnes, I replied carefully, but there remains the matter of intellectual property rights and the attempted misappropriation of my innovations. Howard Phillips nodded. We understand. The board is prepared to negotiate a revised agreement that properly acknowledges your ownership stake in the core algorithms while allowing TechVision to maintain commercial rights to the platform itself. Would that framework be acceptable as a starting point for discussion? It was more than I had hoped for. Not only would I regain control of my project, but I would also secure proper recognition and compensation for my innovations. More importantly, I would have the leverage to ensure nothing like this happened again, to me or my team. Yes, I agreed. That would be an acceptable starting point. As we began discussing the details of my return and the future of the project, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Katherine had tried to erase me from my own creation, but in doing so, she had only cemented my position and validated my worth. Sometimes, the best defense is not just good documentation, but the courage to use it when it matters most. The week following my reinstatement was a whirlwind of activity and adjustment. Katherine's office was cleared out within 24 hours of the board meeting. Company security escorted her from the building after she had gathered her personal belongings, her face a mask of controlled rage. Employees whispered in corners, rumors spreading like wildfire. But the official statement from TechVision was simply that there had been a change in leadership due to strategic differences. My first action upon returning was to call a team meeting with Jessica, Michael, and Aiden. Their faces lit up with a mixture of shock and joy when I walked into our project room, my access badge restored and my position reaffirmed. "You are back!" Jessica exclaimed, jumping up from her chair. "We thought, Katherine told us, that I was gone for good?" I smiled. "Not quite. There have been some significant changes, and I wanted you all to hear directly from me what happened and what comes next. I gave them a simplified version of events, leaving out the most sensitive details about Katherine's communications with DataShield, but making it clear that her management decisions had been found problematic by the board. I emphasized that our security platform project was now a top priority for TechVision, with increased resources and a renewed commitment to doing things right. "What about Philip?" Aiden asked cautiously. "He has been telling everyone he is taking over as project lead." "Philip has been reassigned to another department," I explained. "His involvement with our project has ended." The relief in the room was palpable. Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. "Cher, we need to talk about the code changes that were made while you were being pushed out. There are issues buried in there that could cause real problems." "I know," I nodded. "Our first priority is a complete code review and security audit. We need to identify and fix every unauthorized modification before we proceed with any further development." Over the next few days, we meticulously combed through every line of code that had been altered in the previous months. Just as I had suspected, there were subtle but dangerous vulnerabilities inserted into critical security components. Had the platform been deployed with these flaws, it would have created backdoor access that someone with the right knowledge could easily exploit. While we worked to restore the integrity of our project, the TechVision legal team was conducting a thorough investigation into Katherine's activities. Howard Phillips requested several meetings with me to review email communications and project documentation that might reveal the full extent of the planned technology transfer. A week after Katherine's departure, Eleanor Barnes called me into her office for a private conversation. "The investigation has uncovered more than we anticipated," she said gravely. "It appears Katherine was not just planning to share information with DataShield. She had negotiated a position there as their new chief security officer, with a compensation package tied directly to the successful implementation of technology very similar to your security platform. That explains her urgency to push me out and accelerate the project timeline," I replied. "She needed to deliver the technology quickly to secure her new position." Eleanor nodded. "We have also discovered that she deliberately misrepresented your work and contributions to the board over the past several months. Many of the concerns she raised about your performance were fabricated to justify your eventual termination." The conversation shifted to my future at TechVision. Eleanor explained that the board had unanimously approved a new position for me as Director of Security Innovation, with direct oversight of not just my original project, but all security-related initiatives within the company. "We need someone with both technical expertise and integrity leading these efforts," she said. "Your actions in protecting both your innovations and the company's interests demonstrated both." The revised intellectual property agreement that Richard and TechVision's legal team negotiated was better than I could have hoped for. I retained co-inventor status on all patents related to my security algorithms, would receive royalties on products utilizing those algorithms, and maintained the right to publish academic papers on the theoretical aspects of my work. With my position secure and the project back on track, I turned my attention to rebuilding my team and re-establishing a healthy work environment. I promoted Jessica to lead security engineer, recognizing both her technical skills and the loyalty she had shown during the crisis. Michael took on expanded responsibilities for user experience design across all security products, while Aiden was given resources to build a dedicated data analytics team focused on identifying potential security threats. The atmosphere in our department transformed. Where Katherine had fostered competition and secrecy, I emphasized collaboration and transparency. Weekly open forum meetings allowed anyone to raise concerns or suggest improvements without fear of retribution. Documentation became a shared priority, ensuring that no single person held exclusive knowledge of critical systems. 3 months after my return, we received word that DataShield was facing its own internal investigation. Anonymous whistleblowers, possibly prompted by news of Katherine's departure from TechVision, had raised concerns about corporate espionage attempts and unethical business practices. Alan Davis took an abrupt leave of absence, and the company's stock price suffered as investors questioned its leadership. "Karma comes around," James commented when he shared the news article with me over lunch. He had been one of my strongest advocates during the crisis and remained a trusted friend and colleague. I am just glad it was resolved before any real damage was done to TechVision or our clients, I replied. While I felt vindicated by DataShield's troubles, my focus remained on moving forward rather than dwelling on Katherine's failed scheme. The legal aftermath continued for several months. TechVision filed civil claims against Katherine for breach of fiduciary duty and attempted misappropriation of trade secrets. Rather than face a protracted legal battle and potential criminal charges, she agreed to a settlement that included financial penalties and restrictions on her future employment in the security software industry. DataShield, facing potential legal action from TechVision, quickly distanced itself from both Katherine and Alan Davis. They issued public statements denying any corporate involvement in attempts to acquire our technology inappropriately and announced a comprehensive review of their business ethics policies. As for Philip, he eventually left TechVision for a position at a smaller company. Whether he had been a knowing participant in Katherine's plan or merely a pawn remained unclear, but his reputation within the industry was tarnished by association. By the 6-month mark after my reinstatement, our security platform had recovered from the setbacks and was progressing rapidly toward completion. The additional resources provided by the board allowed us to expand our testing protocols and enhance features beyond our original specifications. What Katherine had tried to rush through in a compromised state was now developing into something truly groundbreaking. Eleanor Barnes invited me to present our progress directly to the board, a privilege typically reserved for C-level executives. As I walked them through the platform's capabilities and the innovative approaches we had taken to solve persistent security challenges, I could see genuine appreciation in their eyes. This was no longer just another project. It had become a flagship initiative that would define TechVision's position in the security market for years to come. After the presentation, Eleanor took me aside. The board has been discussing the future of our technology leadership, she said. When this platform launches successfully, we would like you to consider taking on the role of Chief Technology Officer. The position will be opening at the end of the year, and your name is at the top of our list. The offer stunned me. From nearly losing my job to being considered for a C-suite position within 6 months was a remarkable turnaround. It was validation not just of my technical abilities, but of the principles I had fought to uphold. I would be honored to be considered, I told her, sincerely. As I walked back to my office, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The crisis with Katherine had been painful and frightening, but it had also forced me to advocate for myself and my work in ways I might never have done otherwise. I had discovered strengths I did not know I possessed and possibilities I had never considered. The security platform that had almost been stolen from me was now positioned to become a market-leading product, with my name rightfully attached to its innovation. More importantly, I was creating a department culture based on ethical practices and mutual respect, ensuring that what happened to me would not happen to others under my leadership. Sometimes the most significant growth comes through our greatest challenges. Katherine had tried to erase me from my own creation, but in her attempt to remove the obstacle I had become, she had instead catapulted me toward opportunities I might otherwise never have reached. 6 months after the successful launch of our security platform, I stood at the podium during TechVision's annual company gathering, now wearing the title of Chief Technology Officer. The journey from nearly being erased from my own project to leading the company's entire technological direction still felt surreal at times. Our platform had exceeded all market expectations. Major clients across finance, healthcare, and government sectors had adopted our solution, praising its robust security architecture and innovative approach to data protection. Industry analysts were calling it a breakthrough in corporate security technology, and our stock price had risen 32% since the launch. Success is not just about innovation, I told the assembled employees. It is about integrity, perseverance, and building something that truly matters. I looked across the sea of faces, spotting Jessica, Michael, and Aiden sitting together near the front. Their contributions had been instrumental, and each had grown professionally through the challenges we had overcome together. As the applause faded, and I returned to my seat, I reflected on the profound personal journey of the past year and a half. The path from that devastating phone call with Katherine to this moment had transformed me in ways I never anticipated. The healing process had not been instantaneous. For weeks after my reinstatement, I experienced anxiety each time my phone rang unexpectedly or when unfamiliar faces appeared in meetings. I would wake up in the middle of the night, worried that somehow all I had rebuilt would be taken away again. The psychological impact of betrayal and professional gaslighting had left deeper scars than I initially recognized. James was the first to notice my struggles. "You flinch every time someone walks behind you in meetings," he observed over coffee one morning. "And you triple-check every email before sending it. You are safe now, Cher. You won." His observation made me realize I needed to address my lingering trauma. I began working with a therapist who specialized in workplace trauma and rebuilding professional confidence. Through those sessions, I learned to process the anger and betrayal I felt toward Katherine, without letting those emotions define my leadership style. Gradually, I reclaimed not just my professional standing, but my sense of security and trust. I established new personal practices, including regular time away from technology to hike in the mountains around Seattle. The perspective gained from standing on mountaintops provided clarity that no office could offer. My relationship with the board evolved from cautious alliance to genuine mutual respect. Eleanor Barnes became something of a mentor, offering wisdom from her decades of corporate leadership experience. "What happened to you was terrible," she told me once, "but how you responded revealed your true character. Never lose that, no matter how high you climb." As CTO, I implemented structural changes to protect other innovators within TechVision. We established clear intellectual property protocols that recognized individual contributions while still securing company interests. Documentation of idea generation became standard practice, creating transparent records of who contributed what to each project. Most importantly, we created multiple channels for reporting ethical concerns, ensuring that no future Katherine could isolate and undermine talented team members. Jessica thrived as lead security engineer, eventually building her own team focused on emerging threats. Michael revolutionized our user interface designs, making complex security accessible to non-technical users. Aiden developed predictive models that could identify potential vulnerabilities before they were exploited. Each had grown beyond what they might have achieved under Katherine's restrictive leadership. The industry took notice of our transformation. TechVision began attracting top talent from competitors, with many citing our ethical practices and innovation culture as primary reasons for wanting to join. Former employees who had left during Katherine's tenure reached out about returning, drawn by the positive changes they had heard about. My father, the contract lawyer who had instilled in me the importance of reading the fine print, could not have been prouder when I shared the full story with him. "I always told you that documentation matters," he said with a smile. "But you took that lesson further than I ever imagined." The legal aftermath with Katherine eventually concluded with a comprehensive settlement. She was barred from working in security software development for 5 years and required to complete ethics training before returning to any corporate leadership role. DataShield paid significant damages to TechVision, but managed to survive the scandal by completely replacing their executive team and implementing strict ethical oversight. As for me, the experience fundamentally changed how I viewed professional relationships and corporate power dynamics. I became an outspoken advocate for ethical leadership and employee protections within the tech industry. At conferences and industry events, I began sharing a carefully anonymized version of my experience, helping others recognize and respond to similar situations. "The greatest threat to innovation is not failure," I would tell audiences. "It is the theft and suppression of ideas by those who value control over creation." 1 year to the day after Katherine's termination, I received an email from a software engineer at another company who had heard me speak. She described a situation eerily similar to what I had faced and asked for advice on documenting and protecting her work. The guidance I provided helped her navigate her own crisis successfully. That email led to dozens more, creating an informal network of tech professionals supporting each other through workplace challenges. Looking back at the entire journey, I realized that what Katherine had intended as my professional destruction had instead triggered profound growth. I had evolved from a talented but somewhat isolated engineer into a leader committed to both innovation and ethical business practices. My technical skills remained important, but I now understood that my ability to stand firm in the face of injustice was equally valuable. The IP loophole that had saved my career became a catalyst for broader change, not just for me, but for an entire organization and potentially an industry. What began as a personal battle for recognition had transformed into a mission to create environments where innovation could flourish without fear of appropriation or erasure. As I looked out my office window at the Seattle skyline, I thought about all the brilliant minds working in buildings across the city. How many were facing their own Katherines? How many needed to discover their own power to resist and overcome? The thought reinforced my commitment to continue sharing my story and the lessons it taught. Sometimes our most painful experiences become our most powerful teachers. Katherine's attempt to checkmate me had forced me to discover strengths I never knew I possessed and opportunities I might otherwise never have pursued. In trying to remove me from my creation, she had instead catalyzed my transformation into someone capable of much greater impact. The true victory was not just in reclaiming my project or advancing my career, it was in discovering that beyond technical skill and innovative thinking, courage and integrity were equally important tools in my professional arsenal. No algorithm or security protocol could substitute for the willingness to stand up for what was right, even when doing so carried significant risk. As I prepared for a meeting with my expanded technology team, I thought about all the future innovations we would create together in an environment of trust and mutual respect. That was perhaps the most meaningful checkmate move of all. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a professional setting? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about navigating workplace challenges with integrity. Share this with someone who might be facing their own Katherine right now. Remember, sometimes our greatest strengths emerge precisely when someone tries to undermine us. Thank you for watching, and until next time, protect your innovations and trust your instincts.